Welcome back to The Dwight Show. I'm Leanne, the creator of the show, and this is Kat. Today we will be talking about queer representation in television and film. I am currently an NYP film student, and I've been studying film for 2 years now, and will go on to be a DP film student next year. I've done studies and research into film and the film industry and queer representation in film.
And I'm here as just someone who likes media and likes seeing myself in media, and someone who has done quite a bit of looking into this topic for personal benefit.
Okay, so there are a lot of controversies over Hollywood's negative depictions of homosexuality, and it's been focused on how they marginalize and silence queer people.
If you're going to talk about queer LGBT people in media, you're going to have to go all the way back to 1890, right? Because gay people have existed since people have existed. So with the invention of film, you had a lot of queer people flocking to this new art form because theater and art in general often draws people who feel like outsiders to it as a way to kind of escape the society that isn't that doesn't let you exist. So in the early days of film, there was a lot of LGBT creators creating characters, and this led to some really important moments in film.
Yeah, and an example of this is The Wings. It's a 1927 film, and it depicts cinema's first gay kiss between two men. It's a beautiful film. It looks amazing. Yes.
I've definitely watched. I haven't actually watched that one. It's on my list. Stuff from the early days of film is sometimes difficult to watch because it's so far culturally removed from what we have today, that I don't have much of a voice on that. I know a bit more about the postcode stuff and the code. Okay, when I say code, I don't know if everyone knows what I mean. It's the Hays Code, yeah?
Yeah, it's the Hays Code. It included it's basically like a set of morality laws that regulated what could be shown in film and media. It did include a lot of stuff, but the most important one to today's discussion is basically how it halted open representation of homosexuality.
Yes. So pre-Hays Code, we have content where there's gender exploration and sexual exploration and queerness in this media. But 1930s, specifically in America, because that's where, besides France, a lot of Hollywood is in America. Obviously, of course. So the Great Depression and kind of rise of fascism in Europe, there's a lot of more conservative ideals going around. People are getting into a kind of moral panic. So they institute these new laws for this new medium. And they're self-imposed, but that's kind of, it doesn't really mean much, because if you don't follow these rules and if you don't depict the things that Hollywood and the government want you to depict as bad, then your movie isn't going to get produced. It's not going to get money behind it. It's not going to be well received, and it's just not going to be successful, which is why there isn't open representation. It's not that it was illegal. It's just that you couldn't do it, really. Yeah. What we do have is characters who are coded. We have, like, movies that are in the closet, basically.
Yeah, and especially after the regulations got a lot stricter after 1940s. Around
1934, actually.
1934.
So Hays Code was implemented in 1930, but then in 1934 they got a lot more strict about it and they got a lot more serious. And during the Hays Code, we see a lot of the rises of tropes that still exist today and things that have been furthered into the modern era. Like I said, queer coding, which is when you try and signal to an audience that a character is LGBT without outright saying it. Yeah. And during the Hays Code, this was done because they couldn't say that a character was gay because they weren't allowed to. But nowadays, it's a lot more, we're not going to say a character's gay because we want money from homophobic markets.
Yeah, and during that time, it was coded through a character's mannerisms and behaviors, which did create queer coding and queer aesthetics that can sometimes be used for negative reasons.
Yes, especially in a more modern time. Another way that queer coding is done is through signals that are within the queer culture that straight people wouldn't pick up on.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk after the
Hays Code, post-Hays Code, also post-Lavender Scare, which was in the 50s. It happened at the same time as the Hays Code. It was a moral panic. That's a much more political thing, but I just feel like it's important to mention.
Mm-hmm.
There was more going on during this. So 68 is when the Hays Code was was taken away. So let's start there, right?
Yeah, and while the gays and the lesbians were becoming more visible and vocal in real life, the representation in media got much more homophobic, and LGBTQ characters were seen as predatory, as suicidal, dangerous, and some of these examples are The Children's Hour, The Boys Band, Midnight Express, and The Vanishing Point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are good examples. So what you said about like more openness leading to more direct homophobia. When these characters are closeted, when they're just coded, they can be handled somewhat sensitively. Like Rebel Without a Cause is a movie from 1955. This is in the middle of Lavender Scare, middle of the Hays Code. And the character of Plato is one of the most famous examples of queer coding during the Hays Code. And he's not entirely demonized. He is killed, but this isn't, he's not a character that's portrayed as evil. Whereas movies like Psycho, and this isn't after the Hays Code yet, but it's closer, it's in the 60s, we're starting to have more openness about gay people, and we're having protests and riots, and things are starting to happen more in the 60s and 70s. You have a queer character, a transgender female character, who is portrayed in a murderous, rageful sort of way.
Mm-hmm.
And these depictions of queer characters in horror continue quite often. There's a lot of them. But yes, as characters start to come out, as the coding starts to kind of fall away a little bit, the depictions are still very negative.
Like in movies like Psycho or The Silence of the Lambs.
Mm-hmm. Those are, trans female characters portrayed as murderous people, which is not true to real life.
Okay, let's talk the new queer cinema movement in the 90s.
Yes.
Yeah, that's when queer independent filmmakers started to produce their own films. Of course, this was in the midst of the AIDS epidemic.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And basically, they rejected heteronormative viewpoints to homosexual characters.
So for the audience, this new age thing, it's if you've seen or heard of Rent, it's around that time period, right?
Yeah.
So it is these independent creators who are putting their own stories onto the screen. It's kind of like a return to the 20s, where we don't have these rules anymore, so we can do what we want to do, and we can put ourselves onto the screen. And there you have, still things are handled in a way that isn't necessarily to the standards that we have today, but it's still a step forward, which is probably one of the biggest, most important things. It's all step forwards, right? Which is brings me to modern media. Yeah. And I think that we should step away from movies for just a second and talk about TV shows. And when I say like step forwards, a really good example of this is how TV shows like The Legend of Korra.
Oh, love it.
Yes, have provided stepping stones for much more open representation, like Owl House. So I don't know if you're familiar with these. In Legend of Korra, it's a pretty straight show, except for at the ending, there is like a proposed female-female pairing with the main character and her friend. But this is a very kind of, it's quiet.
Yeah, like you could look at this through a heteronormative lens and not pick up it at all.
It's just at the ending, and they don't do more than hold hands, even though characters kiss in the show before. But then you look at something much more recent, like the Owl House, and they have openly lesbian and bi characters, and they are allowed to do, whatever, the same things that their straight counterparts can do. And it's good that we're stepping forward, and I think that that's what queer media really needs. We're like taking steps, small steps.
Yeah, and like let's talk about like films for adults now. Like I think a great example of where queer representation is good is Euphoria. You might not have heard about it, but it's a very deeply authentic picture of queer people, and it allows being gay or being trans not to be the complete plot of a storyline of a character. It's simply an aspect of their identity, and I think that's what real LGBTQ representation should be.
Yes, that's what everyone is saying. That's what we're all saying. It's not that we need more gay stories. It's that we just want characters like us in the stories that we love. This is why there's a long history of fandom stuff within queer communities, but that's a whole other topic. But it's not that there need to be more gay stories. It's just that we want these normal relationships within these contexts. We have straight characters. Why can't we have gay ones in the same places, right? And why does it have to be such a big deal when it happens? We kind of know what it is that is like desired. We know what we want to see. We want to see more characters who are they're here, they're queer. But it's not the whole focus of the plot. Like, for example, The Mitchells versus the Machines is a newer show. It's more children's media, which is interesting, and another thing, different thing, yes. But it's a character who is queer and is LGBT, but that's not the whole focus of the plot. And that's one of the things that needs to change. And another thing that needs to change is the perspective. We're often looking at queer stories from a cis straight perspective. And I'm just really quick going to mention 2 documentaries that I've watched recently that deal with this in different ways. They both deal with trans issues, and they both have transgender people in them. But one is made with a cis audience in mind, and one is made with more of a trans audience in mind. And as a result, the one made with the trans audience in mind is better. So the documentary Disclosure, it's on Netflix. It's quite well known, but it focuses a lot on what is a trans person, and this is something that you don't need told to you if you've experienced it. It's very much so made for cis people who want to learn about the history of trans people, versus the documentary Transparent, which is from 2006, I believe. And it's about transgender fathers and what it means to be a parent when you're transitioning.
Yeah, so I guess like queer media products should be created by queer people.
Yeah, representation isn't just in front of the screen. We need representation behind the screen. We need gay people producing gay content, not a bunch of straight writers in a room thinking, oh, but what would a gay person be like? You need someone there that has that lived experience that can tell you. And that's what I think is important. Just include us in the writing, not just the narrative. Well, thank you so much for having me here, and I'd love to read the comments, leave your thoughts there if they're unlocked.
Yes, if they are unlocked.
If they're unlocked,
School,
if they're not,
please.
then that's unfortunate.
Very unfortunate. Okay, see you next time.
See you next
Bye.
time. Thank you.
Okay, turn it off.